most people, when they think of folks that are here, the Dreamers, DACA, they think of young people who were born in other countries, maybe at a very early age, brought here by their parents, and maybe have no recollection of the countries that they grew up in. But they've been here now. They came here, raised here, educated here, and many of them in our public schools. None of them had the opportunity to go to college. And we have a historically black college university named Delaware State University in Dover, which is the home of the Hornets, a wonderful land-grant school that I've been heavily invested in as governor, and even now to make sure that they rise and continue to improve, and very proud of all the progress that's been made there. I was invited by their president, Harry Williams, to come to the campus a couple of months ago. And literally while we were there, we met with maybe 40 Dreamers, DACA students, who had been born in other countries and brought here by their parents years and years ago. And I've met a lot of college students in my day. We've been joined on the floor here by Senator Durbin from Illinois. He's probably met at least as many as I have, probably more, because he's from a bigger state. But I want to say, I don't think I've ever been more impressed by a group of college students in my life than the young men and women I met that day. And we literally happened to be there at 11 o'clock in the morning that day when President Obama, the administration, announced that the time for the Dreamers was going to expire, I think, in 6 months. And that unless the Congress was able to somehow put together an agreement and pass legislation, which is hard to do without the support of the administration. And I was there with young people that day. I'll never forget what one young man said to us. I think he'd been born in Central America, either Honduras, Guatemala, or Salvador. And he stood and spoke. This was right on the heels of, we're having this program, recognizing these young people and celebrating how their promise and potential. And right in the middle of all this, we got this announcement, learned what the administration had just announced about sending these folks home in 6 months. Or back home, not really home, because their home was here, but back to the places they were born. One young man, it was about 4 or 5, maybe 6 of the students, all undergrads. Some were freshmen, some were sophomores. I'll never forget what this one young man said. He had come here, I think from maybe Guatemala, and he stood up when he spoke, and he said, you know, as a young person, I honestly don't remember ever living in my native country. The only country I remember is this country. And he said for years, I grew up in public schools. Every day we would start our school day in class and homeroom by standing and putting our hands over our hearts and pledging allegiance to the United States of America. And he said, this is my home. This is my country. This is the only home I've ever really known. And he went on to tell about what his aspirations and all. I want to tell you, those kids, smart, born to parents who are engaged in their education, have high expectations for their children. A number of the students are working not 1, but 2 jobs to help send them to South through school. I was Navy ROTC midshipman to Ohio State. I worked 2 jobs to help pay the bills. These students are too. They're taking courses including math and science and physics, and they want to do the kind of work that, frankly, a lot of people in this country, some want to serve in the military, some want to be in public safety, some want to be educators, they want scientists, they want to do all kinds of things. And at a time when we have across the country some 8 million, not 8 million, some 4 to 5 million jobs, I'm told, they're literally going unfilled today. That people who maybe would like to do those jobs don't have the requisite skills to do them. Maybe they don't have the interest in doing those jobs. Maybe they can't pass a drug test. But at a time when we have 3 or 4 million jobs that are vacant, unfilled, employers are pleading for qualified applicants, somehow we're going to send 700,000 or 800,000 Dreamers back to wherever they were born. That makes no sense. And one of the loudest voices we've heard in this debate, it's not just a fairness argument for the Dreamers in terms of turning our backs on their aspirations and hopes, but actually it's in our naked self-interest as a nation, in terms of a stronger economy, to keep them here. Why would we educate them here? They learn values here, and then we ship them off to another country to compete with us? Why or start businesses of their own instead of doing that here? And I would just suggest we listen to the employers of this country. We don't always agree with everything that the U.S. Chambers of Commerce or state chambers say. But in this case, they're absolutely right. They're absolutely right. And I think I'm going to stop right there. I see I have like a 3-minute statement I'd like to read, if I could, from one of our dreamers in Delaware. Could I do that? I ask the senator from our whip from Illinois. But I'm just going to read. This is about a woman living in Wilmington, Delaware, which is where my wife and I live. Her name is Kadeen Hayden, and this is a portion of a short email she recently sent to me. And it goes like this. This is her voice, my voice, her words. My name is Kadeen, a community builder who happens to be a DACA recipient, Kadeen wrote. She went on to say, I was born in Jamaica, but I have lived in the United States since I was 7 or 8 years old. I grew up in Delaware and moved to New York in 2012, and then moved back to Delaware recently after 5.5 years in New York. She goes on to say, I'm approaching 30 years old on March 1st, so I've been here in the United States for almost 23 years. My grandmother raised myself and 2 of my cousins. I grew up not really understanding my immigration status or the implications it would have on my reality and on my dreams. I missed out on opportunities, but I assumed it was due to our financial lack. My grandmother worked hard, but she couldn't read or write, so this limited her. After unjustly gaining a juvenile record because of poor representation and ignorance of my rights, I decided I would become a lawyer, not fully understanding that my immigration status would potentially bar me from attaining that dream. After that summer, I gained a better understanding of my status and why I couldn't really get a summer job or travel. In order to truly cope, I determined that if I worked hard enough, surely I would attain all my hopes and dreams. She goes on to say, I told my guidance counselor what I understood about my immigration status and heard nothing but disappointment. I was discouraged, but I remained determined. I believe God would reward my hard work and faithfulness. So I saw a different guidance counselor my 12th year, in tears, pleading for help. She looked at my records, my grades, my SAT scores, my activities, and by the grace of God, she connected me with a family member who worked with international students at a local community college. That would be Delaware Technical Community College, I suspect. With God's grace, I had the privilege of attending Del Tech on a full scholarship. In 2009, I graduated with my associate's degree in business administration with concentrations in marketing management. And upon graduating, God opened the door, and I was accepted to go to Goldie Beacom College with scholarship assistance. I completed my degrees in 2011 and graduated in 2012 with my bachelor's in business administration, again with a concentration in financial management. After graduating from school and living and working in New York, Kadeen moved back to, this is not her words, these are my words, moved back to Delaware. And then she wrote her words again. I currently work with a program that provides mentorship opportunities for minorities and underserved youth who are interested in working in the medical field. I've been absolutely blessed to walk through the doors I have, though they were not the ones I originally pictured walking through. I've had the pleasure of helping and building up others, especially young people. I thought for sure DACA would begin to allow me the chance to finally not only build up others, but myself as well. But with Mr. Trump as president and his ending of the DACA program and whispers of immigration raids, I find it hard to hold on to my dreams. My DACA status ends in March, and with it, all that I worked so hard to build over the last 4 years. She said, in closing, she said, I wrote this long email to simply ask that you fight for people like me. We didn't choose to be here, but we're grateful to be here. It's here where we've grown, cried, dreamed, and worked hard for the American dream, our dream. Here is where those we hold dear reside. It's my prayer that you will fight for me. It is my prayer that you will fight for me and others like me. It is my prayer that you will be our voice in Congress. It is my prayer that you will humanize us to politicians who have marginalized and demonized us. It is my prayer that you would fight for us if we were yours, because truth be told, we are. Your prayer has been heard. And I yield back to the time. And yielding back, I just want to say to my colleague, Senator Durbin from Illinois, thank you for years of leadership on this issue. To do the right thing, to treat other people the way we would want to be treated if in their shoes. And frankly, to do the right thing in terms of strengthening our economy in this country. Thank you so much, Rich.
President.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I want to thank my colleague from Delaware. He and I came to the House of Representatives together a few years back, and we've had the pleasure and honor of serving together in the United States Senate. When he's on my team, I feel much stronger because I know Tom Carper is a person of values and principles and hard work, and he really takes this job seriously. His state is lucky to have him, and I'm lucky to count him as a friend, and I thank him for joining me on this important issue. 16 years ago, I introduced a bill, and the bill really was addressing young people brought to America by their parents who, frankly, were young, didn't really know much about the immigration experience, grew up in the United States thinking they were just like all the other kids in the classroom, and then realized one day they weren't. You see, they're not legal. Their parents didn't do it properly, didn't file the right papers. I'm not holding it against their parents. Let me add that quickly. Their parents were doing the very best for their family that they could. They were taking risks that many of us would take any day for a son or a daughter to have a chance to live a good life. But here were these young people in the United States, undocumented. And what were they to do? They didn't know that old country where their parents came from. They may not even be able to speak the language of that country. And here they were in the United States. They thought things would work out some way or another. Time passed, and it didn't. We have a broken immigration system. We have a lot of gaps in the system, and they were caught up in one of them. So 16 years ago, I introduced a bill, and here's what it said. If you came to the United States under the age of 18, if you grew up in this country, you didn't have any serious problems with the law, you graduated from school, we were going to give you a chance to earn your way into legal status. You could do it by furthering your education, volunteering for the military. There were a lot of ways to do it. But we said to these young people, this will be your chance. Well, that bill was introduced a long time ago. It's never become the law. At one point, back when President Obama was in the office of presidency, I wrote him a letter with 20 of my colleagues in the Senate and asked him to find a way, if he could, to protect these young people from being deported out of America. And he did. And they called it DACA. And the DACA program said if you are one of the people who, by definition under the DREAM Act, would be eligible, you can stay in the United States if you step up and pay about $500 in a filing fee, go through a serious criminal background check, be interviewed, and then we'll give you a temporary 2-year protection from deportation, 2 years that you can work legally in the United States, and come back and see us if you want to renew it. Well, at the end of the day, 780,000 young people in America did that. They paid their fee, they went through the background check, they submitted all their information to our government, and they were protected. Just 3 months ago, President Donald Trump abolished DACA and said, as of March 5th next year, it's gone. And what does that mean for these young people? It means that as of March 5th of next year, many of them will be subject to deportation and subject to losing the jobs that they have or being unable to finish school because they can't work. I've met a lot of those young people. I'm sure Senator Hassan has met some. I know Senator Carper has. He just read one of their stories. And they are heartbroken and they are scared. And they worry about what's going to happen to them and their families when March 5th rolls around. And so for weeks, months since President Trump's announcement, I've come to the floor and said, for goodness sakes, can't we agree, Democrats and Republicans, to fix this problem? President Trump challenged us. Do your job, Congress, pass a law. That's what we're supposed to do. Well, here we are, 3 months later, and it hasn't been done. And what I hear from the other side of the aisle is, give us a little more time. We'll try to get to it next year. March 5th, 2018, DACA is over and finished. Waiting several weeks is bad enough. Waiting several months is unacceptable. And I'll tell you why it is. Because we know this needs to be done now. 34 Republicans in the House of Representatives today sent a letter to the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, calling for Congress to pass legislation to protect dreamers this year. 34 Republicans. They said, and I quote, "It's imperative that Republicans and Democrats come together to solve this problem now and not wait until next year." 34 Republicans in the House. How many bipartisan things go on around here anymore? Not many. Here's one. I salute these members of the House. I salute the 4 Republican senators who've joined me in co-sponsoring the DREAM Act. They, I think, have stuck their necks out, and I respect them so much for it. I'll stand up for them because of it. I thank them for that. And I know why they're doing it. They're not doing it for me. They shouldn't, and I'm sure they're not. They're doing it for these young people, because I'll tell you without fail, when you meet them, they convert you in a minute. For the last several years, I've come to the floor to tell their stories. I'm told that the one I'm going to tell right now is the 99th time that I've told a story like this. And each time I tell one of these stories, it makes the case for why we need to do something to help these young people, and do it quickly. Let me show you this wonderful young lady here. Her name's Blanca Morales. Blanca Morales, brought to the United States by her parents from Mexico when she was 5 years old. Grew up in Santa Ana, California, and growing up she took care of her 2 younger siblings. Her parents worked in factories and in the agricultural fields of California. She was quite a student. In high school, she was named one of the top 100 students in the nation. She was active in community service, mentoring students who couldn't complete high school without help. She attended a community college, Santa Ana College, and I might add, because she's undocumented, she didn't qualify for any federal government assistance. Going to college in that circumstance means working, scraping by, putting things off, sacrificing to get through. She did it. She majored in chemistry and biology. She was part of Phi Theta Kappa, an international honor society. She won first academic team in the All-USA academic competition. She was her class's valedictorian with a perfect 4.0 GPA. Blanca, after graduation, attended the University of California at Irvine, majored in neurobiology, and at UC Irvine, she graduated with honors, magna cum laude. After obtaining this pre-med degree, she couldn't land a job in the medical field because she is undocumented in America. Then in 2012, everything changed. President Obama established the DACA program I mentioned earlier, which allowed Blanca, for the first time in her life, to get a permit to legally work in America. Last year, Blanca Morales was accepted to the Harvard School of Medicine. She's remained involved in community service, mentoring students, teaching health classes at a community health center, and volunteering as a translator at clinics for Spanish-speaking patients. Close to 70 dreamers are enrolled in medical schools around the country, just like her. But without DACA, these dreamers will never become doctors. Why? They're going to be deported back to their countries if they're not lucky. And if they happen to be able to stay, they cannot legally work in America without DACA status. You cannot finish medical school and go on to a residency without a work permit, without being able to legally work in America. They cannot legally work without DACA protection, and President Trump has ended it. Well, are we going to be a stronger nation if we deport her, tell her to leave, go back to Mexico, which you left when you were 5 years of age, give up on all the education she's put on the board at the community college where she was leading her class, on to get her graduate's degrees, on to be accepted to Harvard Medical School? The answer is clear. America would be less if she left. The Association of American Medical Colleges reports the nation faces a doctor shortage which is only going to get worse. Both the AMA and the American Association of Medical Colleges have warned that ending DACA will make this problem worse, and they've urged Congress to do something. Blanca wrote me a letter, and here's what she said. It took me 8 years from graduating from the university to enter medical school. Without DACA, or better yet, a formal way to become a full member of society, I'm left to live in the shadows. I don't know if I'll be able to finish my medical training without a permanent solution to my immigration status. please help me keep my dream of becoming a physician alive. When my colleagues come to the floor and say, we're just too busy here to take up this issue, I wish they'd have a chance to meet this spectacular young woman. I wish they'd consider what she's asking us to do. She's asking us to do our job. We're supposed to solve problems. When you read the numbers, 70, 80% of Americans approve of the DREAM Act. Even an overwhelming majority of those who voted for President Trump believe these young people deserve a chance to be legal in America. Why can't we get our job done? We need to do it and do it now. We've got 3 weeks before we're likely to end the session this year. I want to see us get this finished this year. I want to see a bipartisan agreement. I came to the floor earlier and listened to the speeches of many of my colleagues, one from North Carolina, another from Oklahoma, one from the state of Texas, another from the state of Arkansas, and each one of them said there are lots of things which we need to do to fix our immigration system. I couldn't agree more. I was on the task force, the Gang of Eight they called it, that came up with a comprehensive immigration reform. It took us months to do it, but we did it. We did everything we could think of within the 4 corners of immigration reform. We passed it on the floor of the Senate with a strong bipartisan roll call, and the House of Representatives refused to even consider it. That doesn't mean the problems have gone away. They're still here. But what I'm saying to my colleagues is don't try to fix every immigration problem you can think of on the backs of these dreamers like Blanca Morales. I'm willing to talk to you honestly, forthrightly about border security. Count me in. I voted for it as part of comprehensive immigration reform. But every notion, every idea, every theory that you have about immigration shouldn't be placed on the shoulders and backs of these young people. Let's fix this, and then let's go on to the next phase of dealing with immigration reform in its totality. That makes sense to me. I'm ready to bargain, work, compromise in good faith with any member of the Republican side and the Democratic side that wants to make sure that a young woman like this deserves a fighting chance in America. I believe that. I think most Americans believe it too. Now let's roll up our sleeves and go to work. There are plenty of things that we can do the remainder of this year that'll make a big difference in her life and in the future of America. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from California.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank the senior senator from Illinois. Senator Durbin has been a long-standing leader in this chamber and in our country on this issue, and I can't thank him enough for all that he does so tirelessly. I see his work behind closed doors, and I know his passion and his personal commitment to this issue. I thank you, Senator Durbin. Mr. President, on February 16th of this year, which was 292 days ago, I offered my maiden speech as a new member of the United States Senate. And the subject of the speech was immigration, and in particular, an emphasis on DACA and the Dreamers. And here we are 292 days later, and we have failed to move forward in any substantial or substantive way in bringing relief to these dreamers who have qualified for DACA status. And so we stand here, these 292 days later, talking about an issue that we must ultimately, and before the end of this year, resolve. Let's also be clear, 3 months ago today, on September 5th of this year, the administration arbitrarily, recklessly, and cruelly ended DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. DACA allowed young immigrants who were brought here by their parents to live and work in this country without fear that they would be deported. Later this week, on Friday, December 8th, funding for the government runs out. And I have been clear, along with my friend from Illinois and several other colleagues, that any bill that funds the government must also include a fix for DACA. Now, I want to talk with you about why I believe it is important that we resolve this issue, because I do believe there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think it's important we as policymakers, as leaders in our country, that we craft and create public policy based on facts, not in misinformation and certainly not fear. So let's be begin by being very clear. The decision to rescind DACA is part of a much broader and troubling attempt to remake the demographics of the country by cracking down on immigrants. We have an administration that has ignited anti-immigrant sentiment, characterizing immigrants as rapists and murderers and people who are going to steal your jobs. And we have an administration that has implemented an aggressive anti-immigrant agenda. This administration has called for a border wall that could cost up to $70 billion. They've implemented Muslim bans, which severely restrict immigration from 6 Muslim-majority countries. They've requested 10,000 new ICE agents, and 5,000 new Border Patrol agents when they've not given the resources to be able to fill all the vacant positions they now have. And they've ended the protected immigration status known as TPS for Haitians and Nicaraguans who fled disasters, and may crack down on the protected status of Salvadorians as well. They're seeking to lower the refugee cap from 110,000 to 45,000, at a time when we have seen an increase in the worldwide number of refugees who are in crisis. And this is the lowest number ever in the history of this country, actually since 1980. And then General John Kelly, the President's Chief of Staff and former Homeland Security Secretary, said that he wishes the number was between 0 and 1, the number of refugees we would admit into our country. Now, I want to be clear, I have an incredible amount of respect for the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security, who each day leave their homes committed to doing the work of keeping our homeland secure. It is noble and important work, and their mission is critical. And the vast majority of those frontline agents, I believe, are doing their jobs honorably and effectively. But it is troubling when the White House has encouraged frontline agents to, quote, take the shackles off. In fact, the acting ICE director has said, quote, if you're an immigrant in this country illegally, you should be uncomfortable. You should look over your shoulder. And when you look at these independent acts, there is a clear constellation that's formed. This enforcement surge is a barely disguised purge. And this is not leadership. Leaders should not be in the business of inciting fear and sowing hate and division. Instead, leaders should be about creating smart public policy based on facts. So here are some of the facts. It is a fact that there are 700,000 DACA recipients, 200,000 of which are in California alone. It is a fact that the Dreamers have been extensively vetted before they qualified for DACA. They've gone through a process. They've turned over copious amounts of paperwork with incredible detail. They've gone through background checks. They've given personal information about the circumstances of their arrival. They've answered questions that seek to figure out whether they've committed a crime. If they applied and they received DACA status, we determined they were not a threat in that regard to our public safety. We asked questions that sought to figure out if they've graduated high school, are they living a lawful and productive life? And it is only when they cleared that extensive vetting that they qualified for DACA status and received DACA status. Let's be clear that these Dreamers who receive DACA status, they study in our colleges, they serve in our military, they work in Fortune 100 companies. And they are contributing to our economy in a way that we all are benefiting. If DACA recipients were deported, it is estimated that California would lose $11 billion a year. The United States economy as a whole would lose an estimated $460 billion over a decade. It is a fact also that these young people have stood in classrooms and stood in line in many places and placed their hand over their heart, pledging allegiance to the flag of the United States, a flag that many of us wear on our lapel, a flag which represents the best of what we are in terms of the ideals upon which we were founded. We must be true to those ideals and consistent in the way that we approach so many issues as applied to this issue about what we do with these DACA kids. We must keep our word and our promise to them and guarantee what we promised, which is that we would not share their personal information with ICE. They would not be deported if they continued to follow the rules. And in my experience, it is also true that many who have an opinion or have expressed an opinion or who have the opportunity to make a decision about this issue have never met a dreamer. We can't fault that. But what we can ask is that those who have the power to make a decision on this issue make it their business and make an effort to really understand who we're talking about. Senator Durbin talked about it. Senator Carper talked about it. My colleagues will be talking about who these dreamers are, who these young people are. And you know, I have to tell you, I've been a bit troubled when I've had this conversation. I remember when I had a conversation many months ago with the then nominee to head up the Department of Homeland Security, General John Kelly. And I asked him if he had ever met a dreamer. And he said he had not. And then went on to say, when I asked, well, can I arrange a meeting? He said, well, how about if I could take a meeting instead with their representative? That's disheartening. Before our colleagues make a decision about where they stand on this policy, I believe it is only fair, it is only the right thing to do, that they make an effort to sit down and talk with a dreamer and get to understand who they are and the circumstances of their arrival and how they are contributing to our country. There are going to be hundreds of dreamers here tomorrow on Capitol Hill, and I want to thank them for their leadership and their tireless advocacy, because their stories will change hearts and minds. And let me just tell you a few. My colleagues have shared some. I'll share some others. I've met Yuriana Aguilar, who I brought to the President's Joint Session address this February. Her parents were brought here from Mexico when she was just 5 years old. She grew up in Fresno, California. She attended public schools. She attended UC Merced. She was the first DACA recipient to earn a PhD, and now is a biomedical researcher in Chicago focused on the human heart, doing everything she can to improve the condition and the lives of the people in our country because of the work that she has done and the research she has done. I've met Eric Yang, who came from South Korea. He grew up in Irvine, California, and is now studying business economics at UC Irvine, where he works to help other students. My husband and I attended a play recently in Los Angeles. It's a great program where there's free entertainment in the community park, and families show up and have a wonderful evening outdoors with each other in fellowship. And I met a young woman who came up to me, and she was with a group of friends, and her friends said, tell her, tell her. And I looked at this young woman. She looked like she was about maybe 19 years old. I said, well, tell me what? Tell me, what's going on? And she looked up and she looked at me and she spoke so quietly I didn't hear what she said, and I asked her to repeat herself. And she looked at me and she started crying and she said, I am DACA. And she was trembling as she cried, absolutely in fear of what her future may hold. So I suggest that before we take a position on this issue, let's take a moment, each one of us, our colleagues and each of us as individuals, to see these young people, to truly see them, and to see them not through a lens that is about partisanship or politics, not through a lens that is ideological, but instead to just see them based on who they really are and the practical realities of the life that they lived that brought them to this country, the circumstances that brought them to this country, and the lives they are living every day now. These are incredible young people who are doing everything we hope and pray will epitomize the American dream. Work hard, be respectful, play by the rules, contribute to your community, have dreams and aspirations about how you can be productive. That's who these young people are. So let's reject the fear-mongering. Let's also understand that this is an imminent issue, and this is something we must address immediately. Let's agree that each day in the life of these young people is a very long time. Each day that they go to sleep at night worried about a knock on the door at midnight that might tear them away from their families is a very long time. Let's not wait. Let's not wait to help them. And let's reject those folks who say there is no crisis, folks who say this is not an emergency. Let's understand that for these 700,000 dreamers who cannot concentrate at school or at work and who are terrified of that midnight knock, this is an emergency. Let's think about the classmates and the coworkers and our neighbors and family members who have these children who are terrified that this protected status will be stripped and taken away. For them, this is an emergency. Let's think about the 122 dreamers who are losing DACA status every single day. 851 of them every week. Over 11,000 of them since September. And let's agree, this is a crisis, this is an emergency. It's been 91 days since this administration ended DACA, and we cannot wait a single day longer. So let's reject the fear-mongering. Let's find a bipartisan consensus to act in the way we know we should and can. Let's put the DREAM Act to a vote today. I believe it could pass and would pass if everyone looked in their hearts and looked at the facts. Today, 35 House Republicans just signed a letter saying they want a DACA fix before the end of the year. And it included members from California and Texas and Florida and Utah and Pennsylvania and New York. Earlier today, my colleague, the junior senator from Arizona, said, quote, "We don't need to make a statement, we need to make a law." I couldn't agree more. Let's give these dreamers a future. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, thank you for chairing this today, and I thank the Senator from Illinois, Dick Durbin, for organizing all of us this afternoon to speak on behalf of these dreamers. Your leadership has been critical in this fight for dignity and recognition for hundreds of thousands of wonderful young people who know no other home than the United States of America. For 5 years, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program, has created security and opportunity for young immigrants around the country. But now, the futures of some 800,000 young people, 7,900 of them in Massachusetts, are needlessly in jeopardy because President Trump has cold-heartedly repealed DACA. DACA has been a hugely successful program. It has provided so many young immigrants safety, security, dignity, respect, and opportunity. These are young people who study, who work, who live next door to us every single day. They are our friends, our neighbors, and our loved ones. I'd like to speak today for a few minutes about one of these DACA beneficiaries. And that person is 28-year-old Paula Sanchez, who came to the United States from Bolivia when she was 14 years old. Paula's father had passed away when she was just 8 years old. Her mother was in a wheelchair and unable to work. So, with her family facing hardship, Paula came to America to live with an aunt and uncle in New York. There, Paula worked in the manufacturing industry while getting high school education full-time, often getting home late at night and grabbing a few hours of sleep before getting up to head to school to do it all over again. In 2007, Paula graduated from high school and moved to my state of Massachusetts, where she's lived ever since. She now works 30 hours a week as a case manager while attending Bay State Community College full-time. She's been a model student, earning a 3.9 grade point average, and she hopes to enter the nursing school in January. Paula has been a DACA recipient since 2013, but her current status expires next year, and that means that unless Congress acts and saves the program, Paula and thousands like her will have to leave the United States for countries they do not really know and they no longer consider home. Paula's case, like many others, is even more difficult because she has a 4-year-old son, a child who is an American citizen by birth and has never known any other home than the United States. All Paula wants is to stay here with her son, get her nursing degree, and get a good job and give back to the country so much more than she has been given. Instead, Paula and countless other young people and families across the United States face uncertain futures. Instead of going to sleep tonight knowing that they will be able to live their lives in peace and plan for the future, they are left again with uncertainty, vulnerable to deportation and unable to work legally. This is a human tragedy in the making. It is heartbreaking. It is unjust. It is just plain wrong. We should not punish these young people who have no other home than the United States of America. We should not go back on the word we gave when we told these young people to come out of the shadows. These dreamers are engineers, police officers, teachers, future nurses, and students, many in our great Massachusetts colleges and universities. They serve bravely in our military. They are our best and brightest and are making the most of the opportunities that the United States has always provided to immigrant communities. The ball is in the court of the Republican leadership in the House and Senate. Speaker Paul Ryan, Leader Mitch McConnell can either listen to a growing chorus of their own colleagues, to business CEOs, including Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, General Motors, academic leaders, to countless college and university presidents, all of whom support DACA, or they can side with the forces of intolerance and injustice. Congress should pass the DREAM Act so that people like Paula, who were brought here at a young age and who have served in the military or pursued higher education, can earn citizenship. I urge everyone to listen to Dick Durbin, to listen to this chorus of voices from around our country. Protect these 800,000 young people. Protect them because they deserve it, and America will be the beneficiary of these great Americans who are serving our country right now. So I thank you, Mr. President. I yield back the balance of my time.
President.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I want to thank my colleague from Massachusetts for his eloquent words just now, and I want to thank Senator Durbin for his leadership on this critically important issue. As many of my colleagues have stated, we must protect dreamers and allow them to continue to be vital members of communities in New Hampshire and across the nation. The energy, hard work, and innovation of dreamers are critical components of our economic future. These are hard-working young people who have so much to offer and who deserve our support and our urgent action. They are people like a young man from the seacoast area of New Hampshire who recently met with my staff. This young person was brought to the United States when he was in elementary school. His parents emigrated from Indonesia, joining members of the New Hampshire Indonesian community who had left their country because they were fleeing religious persecution. For years, members of this community have worked, paid taxes, and raised their families on the seacoast. And now the Trump administration is engaging in misguided efforts to prioritize their deportation, efforts that I urge this administration to stop immediately. The dreamer I'm talking about this afternoon never knew that he was undocumented until he wanted to go get his driver's license. But he said his life was changed after President Obama unveiled the DACA program. This young man was able to get a job, attend community college, and eventually enroll at the University of New Hampshire, where he is working towards his degree. His story makes clear why there is so much at stake and why it's critical that our colleagues work together in order to support these young people. Granite Staters, like all Americans, recognize the value of hard work, the importance of unleashing the talent and energy of each and every individual, and they demand and expect that their elected leaders act with fairness and with common sense, which is all that the DREAM Act represents: fairness and common sense. We must pass the bipartisan DREAM Act now and protect those who have so much to offer to the future of our great country. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've been sitting on the floor for a while listening to other senators just tell amazing stories about young people who came to this country as children and how they have thrived, how they have become woven into a part of American fabric. These are stories of courage, stories of hope, and it's inspiring to listen to these stories. But what I wanted to talk about tonight is I wanted to add another piece to this story, and that is about why law matters, why it matters that we have a DREAM Act. This is Reina Guevara. She is a Massachusetts resident. She's a student right now at UMass Boston. When Reina was 11 years old, she fled from El Salvador and she settled with her mother in Everett, Massachusetts. Reina is a model student after completing high school and graduating with high honors from Bunker Hill Community College. She won a scholarship. She transferred to the University of Massachusetts at Boston, where she currently has a double major in philosophy and in public policy. Now, until DACA came along, Reina had to live in the shadows, and living in the shadows wasn't easy. She worked long hours in a restaurant where she was subjected to sexual harassment. Knowing that she didn't have legal status, Reina's boss frequently propositioned her to have a sexual relationship with him and threatened to report her to immigration authorities if she didn't go along with what he wanted. So instead of giving in to her boss's advances, Reina quit her job, even though her boss refused to pay her for the work that she had already completed. DACA changed the world for Reina. It meant protection. It meant that she could go to work without the fear of being sent back to a country that she barely knows. It meant that she had access to more jobs where she wouldn't have to face exploitation, humiliation, and sexual harassment. And it meant that Reina could pay in-state tuition and become the first person in her family to complete college, opening up even more doors of opportunity. You know, right now, we're in the middle of a long overdue discussion about sexual harassment and sexual assault. Women are bravely coming forward to tell their stories about powerful men who have abused their power to hurt others. Sexual assault isn't just happening in Silicon Valley or in Hollywood or in legislative chambers. It is happening all across America, at hotels and fast food restaurants and convenience stores. And if you're a woman without official status, you have yet another barrier to speaking out. When the DACA program started, we made a promise to young people like Raina. We promised them that if they came out of the shadows, they would have an opportunity to live and to work and to go to school without the fear of deportation. We promised to protect them. Donald Trump broke that promise when he ended DACA. But there's something Congress can do right now to help Raina and other dreamers like her, young people who came to the U.S. as kids and who have spent their lives reaching for their dreams. We can pass a Clean Dream Act, a bipartisan bill that would give young people like Raina status and a path to citizenship, a bill that protects those young people without subjecting their parents or their siblings to deportation. We could do that, but time is running out. Soon, DACA recipients will begin losing their status and will be subject to deportation. We can stop that from happening, but we have to act soon. I am ready to vote, and many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle are ready to vote. So I have one question for Mitch McConnell. What is stopping you? We're ready to pass this bill. Just give us a vote. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.